What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with a solo reaction to the Lakers-Wizards trade. The Lakers agreed to send 3 second-round picks to the Washington Wizards in exchange for Rui Hachimura, who will be a restricted free agent this summer. Before we dive into the impact of this trade on both teams, let me remind you that, please, it's time to subscribe to us wherever you consume us. If you're on YouTube, hit that sub button, like, comment, help the algorithm love us back. If this is your first time checking us out, please hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player of choice as well. Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, wherever you're consuming us. And then follow us on the socials as well, at HardwoodKnocks on TikTok and Twitter, at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram. And finally, if you've done all those things, join our Discord. The link to that is in the YouTube and podcast descriptions. Someone did DM me saying it's out of date, so let me know if it is, but I clicked on it before I recorded this, and it seemed to be fine. But let me know if you can't join the Discord. And then really, finally, if you have done all those things, consider recommending us to people who you know like sub-mediocre basketball takes. The Wizards side of things. So again, the Wizards are getting the Bulls 2023 second, the less favorable of their own, and LA's 2028 second, and then Lakers 2029 second rounder. I think the way that this needs to be evaluated, this move, it does absolutely nothing to clarify the direction in which the Wizards are headed for the most part. That doesn't make it malpractice or a complete whiff. It just isn't totally telltale. I think the reaction from Wizards fans was pretty holistically pissed off when they saw this, and they believe that Washington was getting hosed. This franchise has, for the most part, flat out sucked at drafting. So a smattering of second rounders for the number 9 pick in 2019, Rui, is nothing if not uninspiring in a vacuum. We still need to take harsh realities into account. Hachimura was not bagging a first-round pick on his own, not with his restricted free agency on the horizon, and so much of his game and fit just still unsettled. We could look, he's put together these stretches of really good offensive basketball, but they're stretches. They're never like these new normals. And regardless of what you think about general manager Tommy Shepard and the rest of the organization, I don't read into reports like the one from Sam Amico that said a rival scout told him, "Why do you rush to make that trade if you're the Wizards? I know for a fact they can do better than what the Lakers are offering for Hachimura." Those reports, if they're not going to assign specific context, what was the offer? Who are the teams? Put your name on it or something. They're dumb. Teams are not out here, believe it or not, are not in the business of deliberately or knowingly accepting crappy offers to move players they want. It's one thing to say the Wizards should have just kept Hachimura. It's another to claim they didn't adequately canvass the league or actively passed on better returns without providing any context or support whatsoever. To that end, though, when you look at the surface value of this trade, the Wizards should have just kept Hachimura. I think that there was just more upside there. Moving him doesn't serve any immediate purpose. You're not suddenly vaulting any deeper into the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes. And I think that Rui's offensive skill set would have been worth further exploration if you were concerned about the bigger picture and decided midseason to sort of steer in to this tank job. You also can't use Rui's pending restricted free agency as an excuse. He was also reportedly unhappy with not receiving an extension. He was asked by the Washington Post, I believe, whether he requested a trade and responded no comment. You don't get to imply urgency with any of that. The Wizards would have had the right to match any offer for Hachimura this season. And if for some reason he left for nothing, they would have missed out on 2 second-round picks. And I guarantee you they're probably not keeping them anyway. At like the 2029 pick, are they going to be the ones making that selection? Or are they even going to be the ones making the Bulls pick this year? So the return wasn't massive in that sense. And to me, you only make this deal if you're just out on Hachimura. The Wizards might be at that point. And that's really not an egregious place to be because of how inconsistent he's been. The other element to consider here is that it does feel more likely now that they're going to pay Kyle Kuzma and keep him. There's been a lot of reports floating around. Should they trade him? Does he even want to be there? He has a player option for this summer. You have Rui Hachimura going into restricted free agency. You have Kyle Kuzma being a free agent. You have Denny Avdia, who's extension eligible, and I think more valuable than Rui Hachimura when you're looking at his defense and the passing off of dribble penetration. By the way, while he's injured right now, supposed to return in 2 weeks, Kristaps Porzingis has been really good this season. He has a player option, so he's going into free agency. You're looking at some contract decisions that were all coming up at the same time. the Wizards weren't going to pay everybody, and they especially weren't going to pay all three of Rui, Kuzma, and Avdia. You didn't have to make this decision right now. Again, you could have just seen what does Rui do to close the season, but it's not, they're not out of place to say, well, we weren't going to keep him anyway. We're more invested in Avdia and Kuzma. And we also want to have the flexibility to keep Kristaps Porzingis. I'm fine then with them taking 2 seconds, and then they increase their wiggle room under the tax this season should they want to make additional moves. It's not a ton. They're still inside $2 million of the tax line, but any breathing room helps when you're that close. I don't think this trade had anything to do with Kendrick Nunn. He doesn't profile as a long-term piece. He does give you some on-ball jet fuel and unpredictability, and maybe that adds some much-needed change of pace to Washington's offense, but I don't think you acquire him thinking, oh, like, we just need the diversification from Beal, Monte Morris, and DeLon Wright. I don't see it. I mean, maybe he ends up being more valuable to Washington's offense than Rui, but I would still be surprised. For the most part, I would argue this deal is more TBD when kind of evaluating it for the Wizards. What does Hachimura become in LA? That's going to matter to this. And what does Washington do next? Is this a long-term cost-cutting dump? Are the Wizards contemplating more seller type moves to where, things heat up with Kyle Kuzma on the block? Maybe when we hear some Kristaps Porzingis rumors, are the Wizards contemplating more like buy now trades to where they wanted these second rounders to glitz up those offers? And that's something to consider, by the way. The Wizards, as of right now, because of the way their obligation to New York is structured, they can't guarantee teams a first round pick before 2028. They can trade conditional selections, but they can't guarantee them a pick before 2028. That's going to matter to certain teams. They're going to want a guarantee. And so if you can include just seconds to glimpse up, maybe not blockbuster offers, but smaller time or medium size offers, they might have just wanted the extra second round equity there, especially as a team that has not necessarily drafted well in the second round over the last decade or so. And that's why I'm more interested to see what they do in the weeks and even the months to come, because we have to look at what happens in the offseason over free agency. Do they extend Avdia? Do they keep Kuzma? What happens with Porzingis if he opts out? I'm not going to be a fan of teams saving money. They could have just kept and paid everyone, but I do understand the team building logic here. I don't think that it needs to give you any more confidence in the Wizards' direction, which I would argue is among the most hopeless or aimless in the NBA. They actively seem like they're trying to just float around the middle or the sub-middle. I would have by now torn everything down and rebuilt the roster. That is still on the table for them if they want to do that. No one expects them to do that. I just don't see how their path to something better than they are now, where you're going to contend for a play-in spot or a lower level playoff spot in the East. What is their pathway to being better than that, or winning a playoff series in the next few years? I don't see the path there, especially when you look at, Johnny Davis, Corey Kispert, like some of the guys that they've drafted of late, not being these huge different makers. I don't think trading Rui Hachimura, though, hurts that path in any way. It feels like, if anything, a lateral move. Did you really think that Hachimura was going to play well enough over a longer period of time to be this huge swing piece for them? Maybe you did. And if you did, you're not going to like this trade. Like I said, if the stance is you think they could have done better for Hachimura, you were banking on the market for him increasing in appeal over the next couple of weeks. If your stance was he's just going to help this team, we need to see more of him, then yes, keep him. I think that that's a fine stance and a fine critique to make. But the bigger issues facing the Wizards still stand, and this trade doesn't really help or hurt that. I don't even think it's really clarifying if they did it to keep Kyle Kuzma and to reinvest in this exact core. I understand it. Do I support reinvesting in the core? Probably not at this point. I would rather see them strip it down. But you also have to evaluate these trades within the character of the organization. And the Wizards have been, frankly, flat out obsessed with sort of being where they are right now. Yes, they want to be better than like 10th place in the Eastern Conference, but they're trying to chase a playoff berth. That's why you keep Bradley Beal. And if you're operating on his timeline, this isn't the type of trade you make. I want to make that clear. Like, this wasn't a win now trade, but you do reload your assets, or you look at your assets in the vein of, well, what can we do to maximize now or the immediate future? And I think with them, they believe maximizing the immediate future involves re-signing Kyle Kuzma, maybe reinvesting in Porzingis if he goes into free agency. And I would argue, with all the rumblings out there that Kyle Kuzma wants to leave, the Wizards have shown in the past that they have a pretty good pulse on whether guys are going to resign. Look at what happened with Davis Bertans. I mean, that contract ended up being a fucking nightmare, but they thought if the news was they get at least one first round pick for him that season, maybe even two, or just the equivalent of a pick and prospect. They kept him because they knew that they could re-sign him. And they did it with Bradley Beal. You didn't actually trade him. You knew you had the trounce card of offering him that contract, but you had to have insight into whether he would actually stay. So I would imagine, even if the leaks right now aren't coming from Kuzma's camp about the Wizards being confident in his ability to re-sign, this trade makes it more likely that they re-sign him, unless, again, they pivot leading into the trade deadline, which I would be very surprised to see if they do. And I would categorize this immediately. The Rui Hachimura trade exists in this unspectacular but not damning vacuum. If you want to have a problem with the way the Wizards do business, I think you need to look just at the more fundamental scale, more wholesale mistakes that they've made, or more wholesale moves that they haven't made. I don't think that they've squandered some potential sleeping giant in Rui Hachimura. Should they have kept him? Like I said, if this was the value on the table, I would have kept him. But I also would have made that move in tandem of thinking, well, I'm also trading Kyle Kuzma. I'm also looking at maybe even trading Porzingis, and I'm looking at more of a gradual rebuild. And I just don't think that right now is on the table for the Wizards. We'll have to see what else they do leading into the trade deadline. And so there's a TBD there for them. I like this trade a lot better for the Lakers than the Wizards. That's all to say. But I think people are being too hard on Washington. And I don't think they ended up squandering this massive asset in Rui. And I think it matters more to look at what do they do before the February 9th trade deadline. What should they do? Let me know, comment, add on to it. Would you blow up the Wizards? Would you tear them down? I think the overwhelming sentiment, even among Wizards fans, would be, yeah, like, let's go the nuclear route. But if you're not going to go the nuclear route, you kind of have to plan around while keeping this core together, which I think is what they did here. That's what, to me, if we had to pull away a sweeping conclusion, is that the Wizards are mapping out a blueprint to keep the crux of their core together, looking at Beal, looking at Kristaps Porzingis specifically, looking at Kyle Kuzma, and maybe even looking at Afdia. That's something that really hasn't been talked about. Hope you enjoyed this. Until next time, please remember to subscribe, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, follow us on all the socials at HardwoodKnocks. The links are in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Join our Discord. The link to that is in the YouTube and podcast descriptions as well. I'll be back with another podcast, I believe, before we begin our trade deadline previews. I might do my most interesting teams at the trade deadline, just to throw something else out there. And then we will be rolling out division trade deadline primers. I think one of them is going to have to be released on a Saturday as we do the Western Conference this week. So please download and listen to podcasts on a Saturday to help the numbers and keep us rolling in name brand, no show socks. But yeah, other than that, I leave you with the shout out to the one, the only, the indelible, the legendary Frank Ntilikina.